For a long time, I, like countless other people, considered Majora's Mask to be the greatest Zelda game of all time. This was not out of nostalgia, it was just because it was, in my opinion, the most immersive Zelda game in the series. So I will inform you that this review will contain no nostalgia bias. Sure, I'm going to compare the remake to the original, but Majora's Mask 3D is an entirely different experience, and should be treated as such. Nintendo has put a lot of effort into making this remake feel a lot different from the original. Now the question here, is that a good or a bad thing? Well, let's find out. Our story begins after the events of Ocarina of Time with our hero Link on his trusty steed venturing through the Lost Woods to find his lost companion, who is presumably Navi. And after only about a couple seconds, Link is knocked off his horse by a Skull Kid wearing the infamous Majora's Mask. The Skull Kid then steals Link's horse and Ocarina and rides away. Link pursues the little devil only to find himself careening down a hole into the mysterious land of Termina. There he discovers that he has been transformed into a Deku Scrub and then is given the quest to retrieve the mask worn by the Skull Kid. Who gives him the quest? None other than the illustrious Happy Mask Salesman. He's got to be one of the most memorable characters in the entire game, and I love the way he moves so suddenly after every dialogue box. Seeing him with smoother textures made me really happy. Anyways, Link is then plopped into Clocktown with no real objective but to explore. Oh, and there's this huge moon over your head that seems to get bigger and bigger as you progress, but it's no biggie. If you played the original in the N64, you'll love spending your time exploring the new layout and look of Clocktown. I know I really enjoyed finding new things that weren't there before and seeing my new characters updated with 3DS textures. Nonetheless, after 3 in-game days in Clocktown, it's time for Link to make his way up to the clock tower and to confront Skull Kid, who threatens to crash the moon into Termina. Instead of letting everyone get crushed under the moon, Link takes initiative and reverses the time back to the first day where the Happy Mask Salesman turns Link back into a human. Now you're set free, sort of, to beat 4 bosses and 4 dungeons, then go back and hopefully return the mask to its rightful owner. The plot of Majora's Mask isn't that complex or anything, but what I love about it is how much speculation it leaves for fans. So many loose ends are not tied up at the end, and so many questions can be raised. The sheer fact that so many fans have spent hours upon hours coming up with complex theories and answers for these questions delights me. Plus, you can relate to a lot of the characters. Take the Clocktown residents for example. They react to the impending threat of the moon falling just like actual people would, some cowering in fear and others in denial. And the interactions with Darmani the Goron before he accepts his fate are some of my favorite moments in gaming history. But really, the story has not changed in the slightest since the N64 days, but a lot of other things, good and bad, have. Every single boss fight has now been revamped in a really great way. They force the player to use the mask that's used primarily in their dungeon in a more interesting way. For example, Adewale, the first boss, requires Deku Link to fly above him and drop a Deku Nut which will expose his weak spot. The same can be said for Georg, who has a second phase that utilizes Zora Link's abilities underwater much more. I really like that the bosses are now more engaging and thought-provoking than they were before. You'd be surprised just how much it spices up the gameplay. In addition to the new boss mechanics, there has been several changes to movement with the 3 main masks on. Deku Link can no longer do a spin dash to gain extra momentum when skipping on the water, and Zora Link's swimming mechanics of dashing in the water have been confined to the magic meter. To speedrunners and fans of the original, I imagine that these changes can be seen as detrimental. "It's like Nintendo doesn't want me to go fast," one of my close friends exclaimed upon hearing the news. However, I feel like these changes are beneficial in navigating the smaller, more compact areas like the Great Bay Temple or around Woodfall Temple. Sure, swimming feels much more sluggish in comparison, but I only felt it bother me when I was just swimming for fun. Also, there's been some major changes to the way you go about saving and traveling through time in Termina. One great change is how the Song of Double Time can warp you to any hour of the day. This reduces the amount of time waiting for side quests and other events tremendously. This is by far the best change in Majora's Mask 3D. I cannot tell you how much time I've wasted in the original just standing around. Sure, this can be seen as cheating in a way, but you can't deny that this makes the game a lot more inviting to 100%. But on the other hand, new feather statues were added as permanent save features, and the save feature with a Song of Time was removed. This, in my opinion, is the worst change in Majora's Mask 3D. You can argue that this makes the game more inviting and fun to newer players, but this also takes away a lot of the challenge from the original. No longer do you feel like if you fail, you will truly lose, as in lose your progress and items, but you feel a bit more carefree, which in my opinion dismisses the tone of the game. Throughout the adventure, you're constantly reminded how serious and scary the moon falling is. By taking away the consequences of failure, the player doesn't feel like they have lost. I feel like I'm not that immersed in the land of Termina or feel like the characters mean mean that much as a result. This is not coming from a point of nostalgia. This is coming from somebody who adores how stress and failure were treated in the original. And obviously, this will not bother a lot of new players and was not that huge of a flaw. What is a semi-major flaw is how the Bomber's Notebook was treated in the remake. Now you can set alarms for certain characters' appointments and it gives you notifications on how you should progress with the side quests. This change is sort of nice for players who want a more laid-back adventure, but for me, this hinders that sense of mystery and that feeling of discovery the original had. With the Bomber's Notebook, the game feels like it is holding your hand way too much. Imagine if you're given a puzzle only to discover that all the puzzle pieces were numbered and you were given a map telling you where every puzzle piece went. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of making the puzzle. This is kind of how the Bomber's Notebook feels to me as an experienced Zelda player, but like the changes to the Song of Time, I can see where this can be useful to other players. I just wish there was an option to turn it off. Other than that, there's really nothing else to note about the differences from the N64 version to the 3DS version gameplay-wise. Speaking of the gameplay, I really enjoyed it on the 3DS. The sword combat feels tight and responsive, and gyro controls for the bow and hookshot are an amazing addition. Something about the remake just feels a lot more fun to me. Venturing around Termina is amazing and quite enjoyable. The dungeons, while there aren't a lot of them, are really amusing. I don't really want to go into that much depth, but the boss fights forcing the player to use a certain mask feel unique, and the variety of puzzles and challenges actually feel, for lack of a better term, challenging. But what I love most about Majora's Mask 3D are the amount of side quests there are to do, and every single one of them feels rewarding. Not only rewarding in the sense of getting something valuable, but also rewarding in the sense of learning about the world around you. The perfect example of an amazing side quest is the Romani Ranch side quest. Essentially, there's aliens coming by Romani Ranch and abducting cows. So Romani, this innocent little girl, enlists you, the player, to help fend off her farm from these aliens. If you fail, Romani is abducted along with the cows and gets amnesia as a result. If you succeed, another side quest gets opened up to you where you must give some Chateau Romani, which is usually only for adults, to Romani's sister, Cremia. On this final day, Cremia will give Romani the drink so Romani can rest and Cremia can be with her if the moon does fall upon them. This moment is sad and touching and shows how dynamic a lot of the characters are. Seeing the sisters like this are the reason why I like doing side quests so much. You learn a lot about the characters and the game makes you think more about who you're saving rather than what you're doing. When I beat the final boss and saw Romani in the credits, I immediately thought how her and her sister were going to become closer due to the things I did, things I accomplished. But perhaps one of my personal favorite things about the remake is the presentation. The soundtrack, although not that much different from the original, is a joy to listen to. The tunes have a way of making you feel certain emotions as you progress through the game. Like on Day 3 in Clocktown, you feel the severity of the situation reflected in the low undertones that play over the typical joyous Clocktown tune. And the visuals look polished and amazing. The models of certain characters like Deku Link when played on a new 3DS make you question whether or not you're truly playing on a 3DS. Everything looks much better and smoother than it did in the original. Overall, Majora's Mask 3D is an excellent game. Despite some negative changes, I feel like the positives far outweigh the negatives. Experiencing Majora's Mask on a handheld with beautiful textures is surreal, and listening to its glorious soundtrack again makes me feel really happy. This game is great for beginners and veterans. Sure, some of the challenge from the original is lost and it doesn't feel as atmospheric as it once did, but you kind of have to look at this game as a new, different experience. You may be asking, but which game do you prefer, the original or the remake? Obviously, I would pick the remake due to how accessible, easy to control, and nice it looks. I would highly recommend you buy this game. If I had to give it a score, I would give it a 9 out of 10. And if you agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to never miss one of my newer videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.